Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in. I'm Sophie. On behalf of Books and Books and Avid Bookshop, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Edan Lepucki and Laura Warrell for Time's Mouth, published by our friends at Counterpoint. Edan Lepucki is the New York Times bestselling author of the novels California and Woman Number 17, as well as the editor of Mothers Before, Stories and Portraits of Our Mothers as We Never Saw Them. Her nonfiction has been published in the New York Times Magazine, Los Angeles Times, Esquire magazine, and The Cut, among other publications. She lives in Los Angeles with her family. To moderate this evening's conversation, Laura Warrell is the author of Sweet, Soft, Plenty Rhythm, a finalist for the PEN/Faulkner Award for Fiction and the Barnes & Noble Discover Prize, and longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Lit Hub, Los Angeles Review of Books, Huffington Post, and other publications. Laura grew up in Ohio and graduated from the creative writing program at the Vermont College of Fine Arts, and she has attended residencies at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference and the Tin House Writers Workshop. She lives in Los Angeles. Just a quick reminder that throughout this broadcast, you can post questions below in the Ask a Question feature. That's going to be at the bottom of your screen, and I highly encourage your participation. We'll do a Q&A at the end. Please order your copy of Time's Mouth from your local independent bookstore. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage.
Hello. I think Laura's gonna come at any second.
I'm here. Hello. It worked.
It worked.
Yes.
I don't think you? I'm good. I don't think we can arrive at the same time.
I guess we cannot, but it's nice to see you. I'm glad we arrived because
we're here.
We're here, and we're like near each other, right? I could walk to your house, I think, at this point, but it's nice to see you here.
It's nice to be here in cyberspace.
Yes. So, I just want to say I'm so flattered to be here. I'm honored to be here. You're one of my favorite writers. You're a friend. I love Time's Mouth. I read an earlier version of it, and if we have time, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about that. But I thought it might be a nice place to start if you could kind of give us an overview of what the book's about for those who haven't read it yet.
Sure. Is anyone else hearing the echo? Are you hearing it, Laura?
I'm not hearing an echo.
You know, I realized I have two windows open. One is the recording and one is I'm as a guest. And I'm worried if I close one out, I'm going to disappear.
Well, I don't hear an echo from you.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Even if it's bothering you, you should maybe close it and see what happens. Worst case scenario, I can just get you back on.
Okay, let's see.
And I'll do a dance if you leave.
I'm still here.
Yay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you.
I did not have a dance prepared.
What if you stood up and did some kind of...
So you can see that my pants don't match? Yeah.
Okay, so now that I'm not echoing, so I'm supposed to talk about what Time's Mouth is about, yes. Right? So here's the book. This is actually the galley. I have the galley next to me. You have the galley too. It's in hardcover now. It is about 3 generations of a Californian family, and some members of that family can time travel to moments of their own past. And the book opens with a teenager named Sharon who realizes she has this gift and renames herself Ursa and runs away from Connecticut to California. And there she starts a cult/commune in the woods of Santa Cruz, surrounded by these women who feel euphoria when she time travels. And then it goes forth, 50 some years from there, seeing her son and what happens to him, and her granddaughter, what happens to her.
Great, thank you. So I want to zero in on some of those characters, but before we do, I kind of wanted to set up the world and ask you about the world. So yes, you've got the book starting in like the 50s, and then we go forward, as you said, into the 80s, into the 90s, and so on. Mm-hmm. So you've got the sort of political and cultural context of those years.
Yes.
You have California, which I really want to talk about California with you. You have the Mamas, which is the group of women that Ursa gets together. And then you have this concept of time travel. So how do all of these, why this world to tell this story?
That's a good question. Why did I do this?
It's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely, after my first 2 books, I wanted to try something that was much bigger. I love novels that are really expansive and cover a lot of time, and not time travel novels, just books where time passes and you really feel that. There's something so beautifully novelistic about it. I'm actually reading The Latecomer by Jean Hanff Korelitz right now. She wrote the plot. Anyway, that book has a similar quality where you're seeing these people grow up and, 5 years pass in a sentence. So the first thing is that I just really wanted to try that. I love to read that kind of book. So why not try to write one and see how that feels? And then when I hit upon this idea of traveling back to one's past, that really can't kind of grow in resonance if there is no past being built in the book. So you have to have time pass to make time travel feel juicy and meaningful. I don't think I actually set about, like, I didn't sit down and was like, I'm going to write a book with all these different eras and locations in California, but that just somehow happened along the way. And that's not to say that it was all accidental, but that wasn't my first intention. Although with every landscape, each of them had their significant, specific challenges, but also each had so much individual texture that I was able to like dip into and made it really fun. So I have San Francisco in the 50s, which I don't write historical fiction. And so this was kind of my first effort. And she's a newcomer to San Francisco and she's a teenager. She really doesn't know a lot. She's very isolated. So I didn't have to be an expert in that time and place, but I had to do just a little bit of research. And then I had sort of fun being in beatnik San Francisco and imagining what it would be like. And then I had always wanted to write about Santa Cruz since my best friend went to college there. So I was always like, someday I'll write about this kind of dark yet beautiful, strange, kind of otherworldly place. And then the LA stuff is all kind of biography. That's the era that I grew up in. And I knew I would someday want to write about that too. And somehow, because I was writing this big novel, it felt okay to put them all in the same book.
Do you feel like, I mean, you're from California, right? And you feel like a very California person, like really steep in it, it really well. Do you feel, it seems, and do you feel like you had to discover something new? Do you feel like you had to learn? Or do you feel like you just kind of gravitated toward, spaces and communities that you already are familiar with?
I think a little bit of both. I don't think I want to be a better scholar of California. I have the new book, Palo Alto, that I want to read so I can sort of understand the history of California from like a Marxist lens.
Oh, wow.
It's a great book. I'm not very far. It's huge. And trying to read a lot more California fiction and feeling like there's just these huge holes in my knowledge, which I think is the case for any topic. You realize how much you don't know.
Right.
So that's kind of a lifelong project that I only recently started in the last couple of years of trying to be a better Californian and literary Californian. I definitely had to learn about San Francisco and Santa Cruz, but I'm not really a research-oriented writer. That might change depending on the project, but I tend to want to just kind of explore the emotive quality of a place. And so I need to know what kind of trees grow in Santa Cruz County. But I just need to close my eyes and imagine deeply to imagine the forest there. I'm not a really outdoorsy person. I've never spent a lot of time among the redwoods of Santa Cruz, but I've been near a redwood and can kind of like conjure that feeling. And that's really what matters to me. LA is a city that I both know. Anyone who's ever lived here, I feel like probably feels this way. Like, I feel like I know it so well and I know it so intimately, but it's always sort of escaping my understanding. And because I grew up here, I have sort of I took it for granted for so long. So things like that were normal aren't really normal. And whole histories of LA, I didn't really know because this was my home. I'm not going to think too much about it. So yeah, I think I have a long way to go, and it's probably why I'll continue to write about it, because it is such like a slippery place.
Yeah. I really hope we get a chance to talk about it because I'm from Ohio and California has such a mystique to it and it has its own literature. Is there Ohio literature? Is there Nebraska literature? It feels like there's California literature, but I want to talk about the characters. So maybe we can put a pin in that. So chapter 1 begins, let's begin with Ursa. So let's begin with Ursa. So she's Ray's mother. She's born Sharon, as you said. She's not like other kids. She has this power to travel back in time. And then she starts the cult, the commune. Would you consider a cult or a commune? Or
I think it's cult-like, but they're not actively trying to amass more followers.
Yeah.
So what is the definition? But they're an enclosed society that has sort of a despotic ruler, and they have their own set of languages. So
yeah.
Cult-like.
Okay. It's a cultish commune. Yeah. So I heard you speaking at Skylight, and you were saying that with Ursa, you wanted to write about a cult leader who didn't want to be a cult leader. And I thought that was really interesting. And I thought it might be an interesting way for you to talk about Ursa. So what did you mean by that? You wanted to write about a cult leader who didn't intend to be a cult leader.
I think we give cult leaders too much credit. And I really wonder how many of them have set out with this goal of amassing power and manipulation. Obviously, some do, but my guess it's a lot more complicated and subtle than that. And I think if a cult leader were able to tell their own story, it would be told differently. And so I am interested in a person who is obsessed with her own power and likes to manipulate people so that she can continue using her power, but is also deeply afraid of people leaving her and needing an audience. So she needs the women around her, but it's not as if she really wants to be a god for them. And I just think that's more interesting. I think we've seen the cliched cult leader story enough that I kind of wanted to tell it askance.
Yeah. I wrote in the book because that's how I show my love for books.
That's an honor. Yes, I agree. I'm always writing books.
So I wrote, Ursa is one of those characters who's really challenging. She really makes it hard sometimes to root for her, to be happy with her choices, but at the same time, she keeps you turning the pages. So how do you feel about her? When women writers write challenging female characters, often there's this sense of protectiveness, or how did you feel writing Ursa as a character? She's a challenging person.
I didn't, well, the book starts with Ursa, but I didn't start with writing Ursa. And she actually only started the book in later drafts. And Laura, you read a previous draft where she didn't start the book.
Right.
So it's interesting to have a book start with her. I think you start the book thinking, oh, she's going to be the protagonist of the whole book. And then the book changes and there's other characters to follow. And she always was going to be my antagonist. I was very much interested in writing a book where you had characters that you really liked and characters that you didn't like. I didn't really write a book like that before. I've had in California, people didn't like my main characters and I thought they were fine and I felt kind of bad. Yeah. And then Woman Number 17, I kind of purposely wrote a character that I knew some people would have trouble with, and I was kind of interested in that tension. And I really like books like that. I think the unlikable female character is something we should interrogate, of like, well, what is it about them that we don't like? Why do we have different rules for female characters versus male characters? But for this book, I was like, I really want to try to write a classic villain. I mean, it's different because she gets to tell her own story. So I hope you have some empathy for her, and you might not be rooting for her. You might be more frustrated than anything, but you are compelled by her. And then later, when she really is revealed to be this kind of bad person, you see the larger story kind of come into relief. So that was my goal. And so I'm okay with people being like, I don't like Ursa.
Yeah.
But I kind of love all my characters. I don't know about you, but like when you spend a lot of time with characters and you're in their consciousness, it's sort of like your family members. Like you recognize their flaws and their blind spots, but you have seen how they feel about things. And I don't know. I generally don't hate a character in a book. I might be like find them repellent, or their choices are like not what I would do. But if I'm interested in them, I usually like them. When I sometimes read reader reviews of different books, I'm sort of shocked by how fast people are to judge characters. Like they just seem so mean about a fictional character. And I'm like, one, they're not real.
Right.
And two, I don't know if I want all my characters to be nice and make great decisions, because I don't think that necessarily makes for good fiction and good storytelling. But yeah, I'm fine with, I mean, Ursa is pretty wicked, and that's okay. I mean, that kind of is fun.
And I think as a reader, it's fun. You know, I think if you're reading a squeaky clean character, that it's just not as compelling. I found Ursa to be one of the characters that I was most drawn to as a reader. And I think, you know, this idea that women characters especially have to be like likable is kind of not reflecting what readers and audiences gravitate towards. So I'm loved Ursa. Whenever she came on the page, I was like, oh, good, here comes Ursa again.
I mean, she is kind of evil, but she also is, I hope, fully realized on the page, and you get why she does what she does. And it just like, we need our female characters to be likable, because we expect all women in real life to be in service of everyone else. So we're extending that kind of patriarchal misogyny onto the page. So I think people should question why they don't like the unlikable narrative.
Yeah. And I think a sign of a really well-drawn character is exactly what you've said. She's complicated. You have moments where you love her, and you have moments where you get frustrated, just like the people in our lives that we love.
Yeah. And for sure, at a certain point, I want you to be compelled by her, but you're definitely not rooting for her. There's somebody else in the scene that you're on somebody else's side. And that is by design.
And there are lots of sides to be on. So let's talk about Ray, the love of her life. When we give children to our characters, it feels like we make a choice, right? It's a son or a daughter. And of course, that's a binary that we're going to acknowledge. Why a son for Ursa, especially in this world of the mamas?
I don't know. That's a really good question. You know, Ray came before Ursa. So first of all, I think Ray came before Ursa in my conception of the story. And some of Ray's autobiography is my dad's. My dad was a microfiche salesman turned location manager who was into Reiki and therapy. And so those character traits were always connected to a man. However, once I realized the trauma that he had run from, I thought it was so interesting to be a boy raised by women who were really afraid of men, and had this very like one note. I even have my character Opal, Ray's daughter, at some point when she learns where he came from, she's like, oh, all women, that's so 70s. Like I wanted a throwback of these like a very strong binary of men versus women, and men being the danger. And what would it be like raised among these women and have that idea thrown at you again and again? I thought that was just a really kind of fictively fascinating idea. And also, I mean, so much of the book is about like, what do you feel like when you're kind of dealing with the past? And I thought it was interesting to write a male body, and like, in some ways it was easier than writing about Opal, who has my exact biography, but like to be a man, like I got to write like a sex scene from a man's perspective, and that was really fun. And it was like one of the few things that...
How did you do that research?
I talked to some guys.
You know a couple.
I knew a couple. And I was like, this, like, I remember I didn't interview him. I asked my husband, I was like, tell me about like having sex, like how it feels for you. And then I think I asked another male friend, I'm turning red about this, but it was really like liberating to write outside of my own perspective and think about how like a man who was raised among women, who was taught that his body and the mother of his child was also taught this, but like their bodies were dangerous. There was something that they couldn't really have. Like, what do you do when you've been taught that your desire is kind of repulsive? How do you have an adult body for the rest of your life? I thought that was kind of a fun little question.
So I wanted to talk about Cherry, but I have so many other questions that I want to end with Opal, especially because you just said she has your exact biography.
She's born on my birthday. Not exact, but a lot of similarities. Same street, same high school.
So was that just you kind of using your own biography to make things smoother for you, or are you Opal?
Well, I'm definitely not Opal.
Yeah.
I can't time travel for one.
Right.
I think on like a purely like logistical way, it was easier for me because there were so many times, like there was so much like math in terms of ages. So it was just easier for me to be like, okay, this is how old she is. And I just was like, I'll just give her my birthday. And then that was like a fun wink for anyone who happened to know my birthday. I was going to change the street they lived on, but I was actually imagining the street that I grew up on. So I thought, well, why don't I just keep it? And then because so much of the book is about the past, you know, I was in the past writing it. So, you know, all those moments when she's going back in time, it's kind of actually an amalgamation of two houses that I grew up on the same street. But that's my childhood home that I'm like returning to again and again. So I felt like that enabled me to have a more of a emotional access to what Opal can do.
So one of the things that kind of happens is in the book, as you said, the structure, we kind of start with one character and we kind of move on to the next character, and lots of things are happening. We've got love, we've got family, we've got abandonment, we've got loss. And then what is connecting all of these different characters is this time travel. And what I thought was interesting, a couple of things that I thought was interesting about how you're approaching time travel is it's not necessarily that the characters are choosing a time and place, right? That's the traditional time travel story, and going back to it. They're actually choosing memories to return to, right?
Yes. And so
no, please go ahead.
So essentially what they do is they kind of can flip through to a certain time and place, like a general era, and then they can go in. So they think of the memory, but they're not just reliving a memory. They actually are in that past moment, and they are like kind of haunting it. They're a ghost on the edge of the moment, and they can see themselves, but also at the same time feel everything as it felt in the moment. But there's also this like, oh my God, I'm returning to this moment. So there's more of a transcendent quality to it.
And one of the other things that I loved about your time travel story is that we have this thing that to me felt very fleshy, womb-like. It's a membrane, right? We're not like going into this metal apparatus. We're going into something very womb-like. Say something about that.
Talk about the membrane.
Talk about the womb-like membrane.
There are definitely, this book, it pushed me in all these ways because I had all these I had this more omniscient narrator, and I had multiple characters, and time was passing. And then I pushed myself in this other way where I love to read realism, but I had this supernatural, or whatever you want to call it, sci-fi fantasy. I don't know what you want to call it, but that premise at its heart. And so how does someone who's really interested in things feeling real make this feel as real? And somehow I landed on making it feel more physically felt, and then just kind of going whole hog with it and be like, either either the reader is with me or they're not.
Right.
And I don't know, there's something that somehow landing on these, I think as writers, we land on certain kind of jargon as a way to like tap into the source or whatever. And for me, it was something about membrane, yolky, something tactile that was also sort of like vaginal, like being born, and for some reason that felt more realistic than some other kind of metaphor or language that I could have used.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to that, but before we did, I want to add something else into the mix in case it's relevant. Wilhelm Reich. I went through a Kerouac phase in high school, and that's how I learned about Wilhelm Reich, because of the function of the orgasm. And so the first time since high school that I've heard the name Wilhelm Reich was here. Yeah. So can you, in whatever way you feel makes sense, talk a little bit about his philosophies and how they helped you write the book, or what journey readers are going to take with you through his philosophies and how they are expressing themselves in the book.
So Ray, he's escaped this cult, and later when his daughter's a teenager, he starts doing Reichian therapy. And Wilhelm Reich started out as a mentee of Freud, but ultimately they went their separate ways. And my understanding is that Freud is about like your mom and dad. You guys can see my nails are slowly.
I didn't notice until
I showed you. This is what live TV will do.
I have none. So
this is from my tour, and now that's
anyway. The life of a writer.
Life of a writer taking off their nail polish. It started at Chuck E. Cheese earlier. So Freud is very much just like your mother is like this, and your father's like this, and that's why you're like how you are. And Reich felt that was valid, but you had to also take into account like their gender. They're really big on socioeconomic status. That was like the main one, like the worker, like, pretty like, Marxist idea of like, how can we liberate the workers so that they can be liberated in other ways? His therapy was all basically somatic. So he had kind of nutty ideas. And at the end of his life, he died, in prison, and FBI had like taken all of his files because they felt that he was a fraud. And a lot of his stuff, I would say, is pretty out there and fraudulent theories, but he believed that like energy raced through everybody and you had to release it in these ways, the orgasm being one of them. But when you go to a Reichian therapist, you do all this stuff like gagging, screaming into a pillow. And the idea is you're releasing the armor, the blockage, so that you can feel. And growing up, my dad was into this therapy. And I always wanted to write about it because I think it's it has a lot of valid ideas that I think we use nowadays about breathing and how emotion and trauma is stored in the body. Right. But also it's just so bananas. It's just interesting to me. And Reich built these things called orgone accumulators, and you're supposed to sit in it and like let energy vibe through you basically. And so I was like, I need to have Ray build his own orgone accumulator, and like what will happen to him when he's in there and what will happen if other people go into it. And it was useful to me, one, just like writing a scene. It's so fun. Like I had so much fun writing Ray going to the Reichian therapist and tickling him. That's another thing your therapist would do, is you pay them to tickle you like really hard. So that's just an interesting thing to play with on the page. But interesting to me too, because we have all these characters who bad things happen to them and they all do different things with that pain. And I was very much interested in a character who wanted to get rid of their pain and their past through this kind of out there therapy. And this is a guy who escaped a cold and is kind of like, I'm normal now, but he's not really, because now he's doing this nutty therapy. Right. And we have other characters later who maybe do something else. And I thought it was fun to try to bring together something very like, Reich died in Maine and his museum is in Maine, but it seems like a very California thing to do, is to be into this alternative therapy and try to marry that with the time travel. And how could I weave those two elements together? And I have wanted to write about Reichian therapy for years because of my dad. I just was like, someday I'll write a book about that.
So I just wanted to say to anyone who's watching, and I'm going to ask this question, and it would be great if you have questions.
Yeah, if you don't ask questions, guys, I'm going to feel really bad.
Yeah, we authors really like questions. It's very, very helpful for things like this.
And we have actually no idea.
There's questions.
We have no idea how many people are here.
Right. We are, but I'll ask this, and then we do have at least 2 questions. Okay. So this will be my last question. So if you're out there, I'm sending some good question forming vibes. All right. So we've got, I kind of want to tie it together. So we've got motherhood for sure. We've got mothers who aren't always the best mothers, right? We've got kids who are traumatized, or all kinds of characters who are traumatized. We have memory, we have loss, we have the desire to go back in time and retrieve what we've lost in relationships and in other ways. How does all of this kind of come together for you? What would be your, if somebody was saying, hey, what's it all about? What would your answer be?
Laura, Flannery O'Connor said, short story is not like a bag of chicken feed that you can zip open and pour out. She says that meaning is made by reading a story, that meaning accumulates as you move through the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can say something similarly when you're writing, where you don't really know what it all means. And I think if you know what it all means when you set out, you end up writing something pretty bland or one note. And that it's sort of this gathering of ideas through these people doing all this stuff that you make the meaning. And so it's been interesting for me to have people tell me what it means, because I'm almost so close to it that I'm like, well, sure, it has all these ideas, but does it have one overarching, deeper subject? I'm not sure. I mean, people are like, your book is about generational trauma. And I'm like, okay, that sounds about right. But I would never be like, read my novel about generational trauma.
Right.
I do think there is something about loss and pain and how living in the past is a burden, that kind of thing. I think that that's a general thing, but I also think that's kind of obvious. So I don't know. Can I say something more smart? I can't say something nearly as smart as what readers are telling me it's about, I think.
Yeah. Great.
I kind of cheated and didn't answer the question.
No. And the reason I asked is just so people have an idea of how you're thinking about it. But I love that answer too.
Thank you.
And I love Flannery O'Connor references. I need more of those in my
She's so good.
In my
She's
diet.
so opinionated.
That's for sure. Okay, so we do have questions. Sophie, are you still out there?
Oh, yes. Here she is.
I am back. Thank you both so much. I had a really good time watching from behind the scenes. But yeah, let's move on to the questions. We have quite a few.
All right.
There is a unique kind of time travel in the novel, with Ursa traveling through her own memory. What inspired this particular version of an age-old speculative twist?
Good question, whoever you are. I do love time travel narratives, but I'm not a huge sci-fi reader, so I haven't read all the time travel stories there are. This one came to me just because I have always wanted to go back in time to my own memories. I feel like this is like pretty universal, where you're thinking about a place that you went, or you go somewhere or see someone and you think back to some past time together and you feel that sweet longing to go back. So I've always had that feeling. And then after becoming a parent, that desire became more acute. So and as I've talked about in previous interviews, I just talked to Ben Fountain. He's a writer. He emailed me and I was like, do you have a Google alert? Because it's going to come up that you inspired my book. But when I had my first son, he was like, I don't want to re-parent my kids from the beginning because it's just so hard. But if for like a couple minutes I could sit with my son on the couch when he's like 4, I would do it in a minute. And I think that is such a universal feeling of wanting to go back. And I just thought, oh, that's so fascinating. What if you could do it? And so that's where the time travel came. And it is time travel, but other people are like, it's more like a astral projection. I don't know what to call it. There's no time machine involved.
Are there any books you'd recommend to readers who enjoyed Time's Mouth? Sorry.
Ooh, books I recommend that enjoyed. Well, I will say one book I recommend is not time travel, but it is a motherhood in the multiverse book. It's called The Possibilities by Yael Goldstein Love. And it's about a woman who essentially, it's the idea of when you're a parent, you kind of always see all the possible ways that something could go wrong, like your baby could fall off the changing table or whatever. And this woman has her young son with her, and then suddenly he's not there. He's trapped in another dimension, and she has to go back and find him. And it's like a great, like, suspenseful thriller that's also about parenthood. So I would recommend that one.
How has your writing process changed or evolved over your last 3 novels?
Oh, that's interesting. My first book, I was in my late 20s when I started it. I was not pregnant, and a new mother. And so even within the process of that book, things changed. And every novel, I seem to have 1 more children, although that's it. No more kids. I would say with every book, I seem to get a little bit more protective of my time because I feel like I have less and less of it. So I'm very much like, I have this many days a week to work. These are the hours I'm going to work. And I just sit down and do it. I kind of have less like lollygagging about it. I also now do a lot more work at writing retreats. I go once or twice, or if I can, 3 times a year to write for like a week or two, just like turning totally feral and just writing as many pages as I can. I think with this book, I learned so much from the revision process that I hope to take with me in the next book, of just thinking about revision as truly a process where you come to understand what you meant to say, rather than, you're not trying to make your book better. You're just trying to see it for what it needs to be, and to be more open to change, because this book went through so many different versions and I learned a lot. And now I feel less afraid to revise next time around.
How long did it take you to write this, including research?
Well, research was always, if there was any, was kind of, was always part of the writing process. I never spent months just researching. I started this book in March, or I sent the first 30 pages in March of 2016 to my writing group. So that was a long time ago. It was like 7 years ago. But 2016 to 2020, I wrote it pretty regularly. Then there was a year off because it was 2020 and many things happened and that didn't really allow me to work on it. And then there was another full year of revision. So in all, start to finish, from here I am now, that's 7 years, but it's probably more like 5. It was too long. I do not want to take that long again. That was just, I'd like a fast little, hot little 6-month number, but
you can do that.
I know. You know what?
Well,
I would
guess
like
some
them,
people can.
Some people. I would like to write a draft within a year. That's a dream, but I never have. But that would be cool.
This is our last question of the night. What's next for you, Eden? Do you think ever of writing books that take place somewhere other than LA?
Never say never. I feel like I never thought I would write a time travel book, so here we are. Right now, I'm not done with writing about LA. The book I've started, which, is it a book? I don't know. It's 40 pages of something. That takes place in LA in the present day, and it's a realist novel for now. But yeah, I don't know. I think I just want to write more novels, and right now California is still intriguing to me, although you never know. I went to a small liberal arts college in Ohio, so I sometimes think about writing about that.
Well, Eden, Laura, thank you both so much. I had a really good time watching this. And to the audience, thank you so much for watching. Please purchase Time's Mouth from Books and Books or Avid Bookshop and support your favorite indie bookstore. Thank you guys so much. I think I'll be exiting the broadcast.
Great. Thank you so much, Sophie. Thank you, Laura. And thank you, everyone. And thank you, Books and Books and Avid. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Bye.